I want to unofficially welcome you to this AI forum. And I say unofficially because the official welcome will be done by someone else. This forum is very timely. AI readiness in higher education, research insights and perspectives. Before I go into the rest of the program, just to say that I'm Paul Ivy, the Associate Vice President for Graduate Studies, Research and Entrepreneurship here at UTech Jamaica. I want to recognize in the audience Dr. Kevin Brown, President of the University of Technology, Jamaica. I also welcome and recognize Mr. David Mayers, Senior Standards Development Officer of the University Council of Jamaica. Professor Andrew Spencer, who has just walked in, President of Caribbean Maritime University. And of course, Professor Daniel Kaur, Professor of Computer Science, Department of Computing at the University of the West Indies. Also among us is Dr. Sean Barrett, lecturer, the School of Business Administration at UTech Jamaica, and Mr. Andrew Lee, Chief Executive Officer of eLearning Jamaica Limited, as well as Mr. Hugh Thompson, Director in Computing from PricewaterhouseCoopers Jamaica Limited. We also have Mrs. Olubosula Akinladeja, the Acting Dean, the College of Business and Management, as well as Miss Celia McCoy, Head of School of Business Administration in the College of Business and Management as well. And we have Mr. Dr. Clavery Hallin, who is the President of the University of Technology Jamaica Academic Staff Union. And of course, we have our researchers among us, the principal investigator, Professor Paul Golding, and Dr. Theo Clark. Also recognize the students who are here present, members of the press, other faculty members from our university. Ladies and gentlemen, pleasant afternoon to you. Before I get into the proceedings, I first must start with asking Miss Celia McCoy to lead us in prayer.
Good afternoon. Let us pray. Almighty God, King of the universe, we honor you above all. You are the one God, maker of heaven and earth, and you alone deserve all honor, glory, and praise. You have made humans in your image, and you have given us the ability to learn and create, to love and to serve, and to have fellowship with you and with each other. Lord, may we be responsible in our use of the talents and gifts with which you have blessed us. May we use our abilities for the greater good of humankind and the wider creation. Forgive us where we may have been presumptuous or arrogant or unkind. May all that we think, say, and do bring honor and glory to your name. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you so much, Ms. McCoy. And I did say, and I will hold myself to my promise, that the official welcome will be done, and this is the time for it. And so I'll ask Mrs. Olubosula Akinladeja, Associate Professor and Acting Dean of our College of Business and Management, to make you all officially welcome. Please give her a hand.
Thank you, Prof. Ivy. I believe that the protocol was established. And so I would like to especially recognize our esteemed researchers and panelists today, and to bid them a special welcome, even though they are hosts, to this AI Symposium on AI Readiness in Higher Education, Research Insights and Perspectives. Prof. Goldin and Dr. Theo Clark have been stalwarts in the College of Business and Management, and also our Dr. Sean Barrett. And of course, our esteemed panelists, Dr. Kevin Brown, our president, Professor Andrew Spencer, president of CMU, Professor Daniel Kaur from UWI, Professor of Computer Science from UWI, Mr. David Myers, Senior Standards Development Officer, University Council of Jamaica, and Mr. Hugh Thompson, Director in Consulting, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Jamaica. Esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I see Prof. Maraj, our associate professor and associate dean for graduate studies in the audience, and heads of schools, welcome all. Now, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to this AI Symposium. I read some time ago an article suggested that AI actually developed from the 1950s, and that since then, persons have been using AI. Not persons like us, but it has been in use. Now, we know that it is now available and accessible, not just to the few, but to all. With this accessibility comes numerous questions. Questions like who, when, and I believe that our esteemed professor and co-investigator and the panelists have started answering that question, and they are going to enlighten us this afternoon on some of what they have discovered as they answer to those questions. It's important that as we move ahead to the higher education arena, that we understand our responsibilities, and that is associated with the use of AI. So, the College of Business and Management has started that discussion and continues with that discussion in collaboration with the rest of the university. And we are here this evening to get some responses from Prof. Goldin and Dr. Hello? Yeah? From Prof. Goldin and Dr. Theo Clark. And so I'm going to just ask you all to relax and enjoy the afternoon as we progress and discover or understand what has been discovered. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Mrs. Akin Ladejo. The program speaks to the opening remarks from the Master of Ceremonies. I've not done so as yet. I was just getting the preliminaries going. So here goes, just trying to briefly frame what we are here to do this afternoon. I'm not sure why Professor Goldin asked me to be the Master of Ceremonies this afternoon. I have been trying to figure it out. I reckon that it's probably because he thinks or knows I wouldn't charge for the gig. And, but I think it's probably more related to my portfolio as graduate studies, research, and entrepreneurship AVP. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we're here gathered, the scientific revolution represents one of the most consequential turning points in human history. Not merely as a collection of discoveries, but as a transformation in how humanity knows, explains, and shapes the world. The advent of artificial intelligence, and in particular, generative artificial intelligence, is shaping up to be another, if not the most consequential point in human history. Professor Yuval Noah Harari, professor of history and intellectual history at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and the author of the book, Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. He views artificial intelligence, AI, as one of the most transformative and potentially dangerous and disruptive developments in human history. He argues that previous human inventions, such as the printing press, electricity, or even the atomic bomb, were tools that were controlled by humans. But artificial intelligence, generative AI, however, is different because it can increasingly learn, can make decisions, generate ideas, and act autonomously, these AI agents. Professor Harari argues that AI is the first human invention that is now capable of challenging our species at the cognitive level. Harari sees AI as a revolutionary technology capable of reshaping civilization itself, offers enormous benefits, but also posing unprecedented risks to democracy, human agency, social stability, and global governance if left unchecked. All of the foregoing makes this symposium timely and relevant. The hosting of a symposium such as this is in keeping with what a university is for. A university occupies a special place in society. It is a place and a space expressly dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge to advance human understanding of different phenomena. Today's symposium is about the phenomenon called artificial intelligence and its implications for the industry called higher education. AI is impacting every industry, including education. Education is not exempted at all. So the purpose of this forum this afternoon, as was advertised, the objectives are as follows. The research that we're going to hear about was recently completed. It was a comprehensive survey that examined AI usage patterns across three critical stakeholder groups: tertiary students, academic staff, administrative and support employees as well. And this research is the first systematic analysis of AI adoption in the Jamaican higher education system. And it establishes a baseline for policy development and strategic planning. So what we have here to do today is that the results will be disseminated based on the findings regarding usage patterns of AI in higher education to facilitate strategic dialogue among key stakeholders and AI integration challenges and opportunities for Jamaica, to generate actionable recommendations for policymakers, institutional leaders, and educators as well, and to establish collaborative networks for ongoing AI education initiatives. And it is not an accident, therefore, that we have the panelists that are here assembled this afternoon to discuss the results after they are presented. And so, without further ado, because you did not come to hear me, you came to hear the researchers, I want to now go into that segment of the program. So before I do that, just to give you a little bit of housekeeping as to how we will proceed from here onwards. We will next have the presentation from the researchers, lead researcher Professor Paul Goldin and Dr. Theo Clark, followed by a brief Q&A after their presentation. And then I will hand, I was about to say the baton, but then I'd say the microphone to Dr. Barrett, who will be the moderator for the panel discussion segment. And there she will also introduce the panelists more expansively than I have done in terms of just recognizing them. So to the research, that's what you're here for. Both of the researchers and myself have something in common. Professor Goldin has borrowed my first name, so we share first names. Dr. Clark, it's interesting, I was thinking about it earlier today and it just dawned on me. My mother's maiden name was actually Clark, so perhaps we are related. But in addition to that, Dr. Clark and I are rich. It's just that he's a little richer than myself, which may cause some envy of sorts. He's a tad richer than me in melanin, but we are both rich in that regard. So then, Professor Goldin is Professor of Information Systems here at UTech, and he's the principal investigator. And he was the former dean of the College of Business and Management here at UTech, as well as the former head of school for the School of Computing and Information Technology here. Dr. Theo Clark, cousin Clark, is a lecturer in the School of Business Administration here at UTech, and he's a co-investigator of this research that we're going to be having the results presented momentarily. He teaches several management courses, including Introduction to Management and Business Research Methods. And his research interests include technological advancements on management and organizational change, as well as transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please make Professor Goldin and Dr. Clark welcome as they present their results on AI readiness in higher education, research insights and perspectives. Come on, you can't do better than that.
Ladies and gentlemen. Pardon? Oh. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I started out in this business in 2020. And there was a lot of changes going on in the space in IT. Some of the terms we didn't understand and we were just learning them. And we thought it was the most tumultuous period in our lives. And then it kept happening over and over and over again. And I think we are really at a transition point now, different from what I've seen before in the 20-odd years that I've been in this aspect of technology. we talk about AI, and I want to be a little specific today. What we're talking about primarily is generative AI. That's what we're talking about. And generative AI is one branch of AI which really is used to develop content, whether the content is text or voice or diagrams or anything like that, right? And although when you see it working, it says thinking, it's not thinking, all right? It's not thinking any at all. Basically, what it's doing is looking at patterns. And the patterns don't necessarily need to make sense, all right? But it's looking at patterns. Now, there's something else I want to say about this before I go into the presentation. In 2019, when ChatGPT-2 came out, it had 1.5 billion parameters. And parameters are just numbers. I don't need to get into it too much. But it had 1.5 billion parameters. The most recent one that Anthropic came out with last month? This month? Last month, yeah, man. Mythos had 10 trillion. You see the jump, right? So it's using this to come up with responses. And what we're saying is that, what we're saying is that this has serious implications for higher education. This image was generated by AI. All right. And what we're looking at is the squeeze that we think that tertiary education, higher education, is experiencing. And we're going to explain the squeeze just there a little bit. Let's look first at government. Government provides us with subvention. So the model is that we get money from government and fees. We have seen over time that this model doesn't seem to be very sustainable. When you look at the percentage of income that a university spends on salaries and what have you, upwards of 70%. It means that you need like 30% or less to deal with everything else. So that's one part of it, government subvention. Then we look at students' demand for education. And what we are proposing here is that students' demand for education is going to change with generative AI. That's what we think, but we'll see what comes out in the discussion. We also think that employees' demand for graduates are also going to change with generative AI. And then we look at generative AI itself. And I want to just say something about it, just very quickly before we go into the meat of the presentation. We tend to think of the impact of generative AI on students. But it goes way beyond that. So it will have impact on students. And there's the whole thing about cheating and what is ethical use and what have you. But it goes beyond that. And I give you two examples. One, so let's get students out of the way, right? Recently, AI Scientist, which is a platform that was built in Japan, it did a whole research from start to finish, went right through, submitted it to a conference, it was accepted, then it was submitted to a journal, peer-reviewed, accepted, no human intervention. No human intervention. So all I'm saying to you is this, that when we consider it and we think it's just a student thing, it goes beyond student because it also impacts academics and what academics do and how do we create new knowledge. So it really, really is looking at how does this transform higher education. Also, AI is being used from the administrative aspect, in which, of course, widely used in HR to recruit persons through the entire recruitment process, right? Now, in addition to that, it is looking at student selection, accounting. I said, I whispered that because PwC is here, right? So it is impacting, procurement. So what I'm saying to you is that, listen, if we look at this technology only from a student perspective and how students are going to learn, it is also going to be as to how academics are going to teach and what will be the purpose of a university. And all these other factors squeezing higher education. All right, I'm going to pass over to Theo, who's going to tell us a little bit about what we're going to talk about, and then you look also at the methodology.
Thank you. Greetings. All right, so for our study today, just so you can follow, I'm gonna talk about the framework that we use for the research. We're gonna tell you a story about the AI disconnect and Jamaica higher education. We're gonna be looking at adoption, response, concerns about teaching skill replacement. We're gonna look at the job market impact in general, then we're gonna contextualize it to Jamaica. We're also going to give you some key takeaways, and then we're going to have a question and answer section. Now, this image that you're seeing being displayed is called the education pipeline. What this is really is the flow for which students enter schooling all the way up to the workforce, whether they're working for somebody or they have their own business. Our study will focus on higher education, tertiary students, and the general workforce. And of course, since COVID, we know we have so many pieces of technology that is interrupting this entire pipeline. So we're gonna discuss this further. In terms of our research methodology, we set out to understand the state of artificial intelligence, specifically Gen AI in Jamaica higher education space. In doing so, we did a national survey where we did a mixed method random stratified survey of high schools across Jamaica, plus or minus 3% margin of error. We surveyed 1,085 participants, deaf, blind, and persons without disability, and we collected information from that. We then did a convenience sampling where we looked at tertiary students across different universities. We also look at academics as well as employees. We later on did a qualitative review of the impact of AI on Jamaica's labor force using the ILO method. Now, the results that we'll be presenting today, or the story that we'll be telling you, is about high school students, tertiary, academics, employee, and the labor market impact. Now, I'm sure you're asking the question, did you all get approval for this? Yes. Our study was ethically approved by the university. Now, we started our data collection in October of 2024, and we ended it around June 2025 to do our analysis, etc. Now, to tell you the story, we applied descriptive statistics to our data, inferential statistics to include chi-square, Spearman ranking order correlation, Kruskal-Wallis test. But we're not going to really show you the numbers where this is concerned in terms of what we did. We're going to give you the meaning. All right? Now I'm going to hand over back to Professor Golding, where he's going to tell you the story. Prof. G?
Thank you, Theo. Click, yeah. All right, so the first thing what we looked at is adoption. How is AI being adopted um, in across the board in the education pipeline? That's what we looked at. And what we did first was secondary school students. And we looked at, as we said, 3 sets of secondary school students. Students without any known disability, deaf students, blind students. General population, almost ubiquitous. And then you have deaf students who used it a little less and blind students who used it even less. And one of the things that we will point out here is that, and this came out in our previous discussion, is that if we're making any kind of policy moves, we should not use a blanket to do it. We have to take into consideration all of our citizens so that we are inclusive. So that's the main thing from that. Tertiary students, everybody, based on our sample. Faculty members, a little less, 86.7%. And the difference between the two groups were statistically significant in terms of usage. So students are using it right across the board. Tertiary students, that is, faculty members, although high, a little bit more reticent. We also looked at usage across disciplines to see, are there any difference with usage across discipline? STEM versus business versus humanities versus same thing. All students using it, doesn't matter which discipline it is. And we also saw the same thing among academics, across the board usage, regardless of discipline. So what we can say from this is that even though Gen AI didn't come very popular until late 2022, its adoption has been rapid. We also looked at industry. How are persons in organizations using it? Not as much. Just about 71% of employees were using it. And what we also found is that within the organization, there was not much policy. What was happening is that individuals were going ahead and using it without really asking anybody anything, right? So that's how that adoption has been taking place. The next thing that we looked at was how familiar persons were with Gen AI, and we looked at faculty versus students. Students, much more eye exposure, much more breadth in what they were using it for, and faculty, low. And importantly, there was a statistical difference in exposure between faculty and students, which means that students are galloping away with this, right? While faculty is a little bit more reserved. But this is what the data is saying. Number of students using for schoolwork. Their views on it, almost all express that they use it for academic work, while at the same time saying that there's some opposition to using it. So there's this dichotomy, right? Students are using it and they're expressing that, okay, I have some opposition to using it, but listen, they are using it. And my experience is that they are using it widespread, even more so in 2026 than in 2025. I didn't see it as so widely used in 2025. In 2026, people have gone, yes. So the next thing that we looked at was response to Gen AI usage. How did students view lecturers' approach to this, right? Students said almost 41% was saying, this is academic, saying ban it, right? 22%, 23% encourage use. Some people just not bother with it and just ignore it, all right? And then just about 18% was tacitly allowing usage. When you now look at how faculty felt about it, 64% of faculty strongly opposed it. Remember now that this is 2025, right? Somewhat. Yeah, somewhat opposed it. Strongly opposed was just about 15%, and supportive was 20%, which is kind of similar to what students are saying with encouraging use, right? Students, about 23% of the students are saying this on faculty is encouraging use. And from the faculty perspective, about 20% is saying that they're encouraging use. So the knee-jerk response is prohibition, right? Now, we looked at how students felt about using AI. About 36% was not concerned at all. 27% somewhat concerned, 26.6% not too concerned, and 10.2% very concerned. So you have this plurality of views on how students feel about the use of Gen AI. We then asked students, okay, if you use Gen AI, what's the detection rate? And we know that universities, higher education, have a dilemma with this. Because you have to be able to say to the students in some way and explain that, listen, you're using Gen AI. I tell you a little story before I move on from this. Last month, I was finishing up a class, and there are 4 assignments. The first 2 assignments, persons could take it home and do it. And I couldn't recognize who wrote these things. Because you have students and they speak, right? So you can read and say, okay, this comes from this person. All right? And I could not recognize. I see terms being used that I'm unfamiliar with, and I'm teaching the course, right? So next class, I said, we're doing it in class. One person got sick. Call in the day, got sick. This person saying, sir, oh yeah, stress we out so. Right? Grades plummeted from upper 70s to 30s for the in-class. Plummeted. So just going back to this here, 93% persons said I've never been caught. And only 6%, 7% said they have been caught. So there's this detection gap. We then asked faculty, at what point do you become concerned about the use of AI in submissions? And some persons are very strict, don't want no AI. So about 15% of faculty were concerned if it was less than 20%. The threshold, though, seems to be 20 to 39%, in which 53% of academics said, listen, if they see it up to that level, they are really concerned. The other numbers go down, as you can see, all right? This is an interesting finding. Both faculty and students hold similar views regarding trustworthiness of Gen AI. Nobody trusts it, just that you still use it, right? So there's this low level of trust, but it's still being used. We then ask, what do you think is the overall impact on education with the use of AI? About 53% of students viewed it as neutral, 33% no concern, only 4% said very positive, and 10% negative. So far more polarized. With faculty, almost 38% says negative. 38%, yes, said negative. Nobody was uncertain about it, though. Everybody had a view as it relates to faculty on this. One of the big things about questions about AI is, will it improve your critical thinking skills? Because that is supposed to be at a premium. And we ask high school faculty, tertiary students on this. Non-disabled students, positive. Deaf students, almost exact positive, 60%. Faculty, surprisingly says, yes, it improves your cognitive skills. Similar to non-disabled and deaf students, right? Tertiary students was a little below. And this for us was a surprising results, but we go where the data takes us. We then asked, do you think that Gen AI can be a better teacher than a human being? 55% of students think that the Gen AI teaches worse. And from the faculty perspective, 43% says that, well, they think, I don't understand why faculty is below students, all right? I don't know why, but we did not get a chance to interrogate staff or anything like that on this, right? Then we looked at replacement of teaching skills. Faculty concerned about replacement, somewhat concerned, 55%. Very concerned, hovering about 20%. So there is a fair amount of concern among faculty that Gen AI will replace faculty. The next thing that we looked at was job market impact. Faculty expected that Gen AI is going to be incorporated in the job market, almost 70%. And they figured that, listen, 17%, almost 18% figure that there's going to be decreased opportunities in the job market, while another 14% figures that the job market will grow. So much more integration in the job market, that's a given. As to how it's going to impact it, whether it's going to grow or not, there is slight difference between what academics says as to how it's going to impact the job market. We then moved from that and looked at policy. What is happening in the universities as it relates to policy? And we see where almost 46% of the faculty was unaware as to where Gen AI policy is being developed. Again, this is 2025 data. And I see where some of this has changed. At least that's what I think. So 46% unaware as to where policies are, while 42% reports active development at the institution at the course level. And a distinction is to be made there, because one would think that the policy would not just be at the course level, but at the institutional level. We then ask about institutional readiness, and we ask about faculty and students this. How ready do they think the institution is? Statistically significant difference exists between students and faculty. Faculty reported a higher perception of institutional readiness over students. And I think what this is caused by the information not yet filtering down, which should not be the case. If policy changes and it is impacting faculty, it should also be, students should also know about it. But there is that disconnect based on what we found. We then asked both students and faculty about, and business really, about skills and job replacement. And what we found is that 73% of faculty said that, well, there'll be skills replacement, skills and job replacement. Tertiary students, a lot less, only 37%, and business also a lot less, 30.6%. These results were statistically significant, suggest that faculty members express greater concern about potential for jobs or skills by generative AI rather than students and persons in the business community. Okay, I want to explain this a little bit without much help from the diagram there. ILO did a study, International Labour Organization did a study, in which what they did was to look at the market, the international market, using two things. One, augmentation, the extent to which AI will augment, meaning that you work with AI to do your job, versus substitution, in which it replaces you. And we used that same format, looked at the labor market in Jamaica, and what we found is that about 57,000 persons are highly exposed to replacement. I'd love to hear what Pricewater would say about this. And it is about 4% of the overall job market, which may not be considered huge. But most of the jobs that we see that are likely to be replaced are jobs that mostly females do. Now, females head about 40% of the households in Jamaica. And females tend not to live alone, they have children, which have a bigger impact than if it was male-dominated jobs. So the female-dominated jobs, you have high exposure to job replacement. And this is of some concern to us. We're at the takeaways that I want us to consider. Adoption, rapid. We have seen that, right? That point has been made. There's a mix of distrust and caution towards Gen AI, while admitting that it is empowering in nature. Impact. The increasing use of impact is forcing us to change how we teach. The whole idea of understanding remembering, and recalling and examining people along those lines is now redundant. Gen AI can mimic the appearance of thinking and learning when no real understanding exists. And I can speak about that from experience. The response from academics in general were uncertainty, bans overall, and then that changed to a more shared form of knowledge and thinking that we can develop across the AI platform. Let me say that over again. I think that what we need to be doing now is to look to see how we can develop policies across the pipeline and not just in sections. So if Dr. Ali is not here, if CXC is doing something, it should be dovetailed with what higher education is doing, with what companies want and what have you, and it should not be done in pockets. We really don't think so. We have seen where universities are now issuing policy guidelines as opposed to doing sweeping mandate. The focus has been away from cheating because we started out just looking at how this is impacting students. But if, as a lecturer, create a question using AI and give it to the student, and the student take it and respond to it using AI, where does the unethical behavior start and where does the unethical behavior stops? Right? And if we look further to see that, well, boy, listen, we can do complete papers, submit them, get them accepted in top-class journal. Where does it leave us as educators? These are serious questions as to how we proceed and what do we want to produce. If we want to produce people with papers, I think we're fine. If we want to ensure that we educate students, the approach has to be different. It is no longer a question as to whether AI belongs in education or not. It belongs. The question is whether universities will shape the role of AI or we're going to make the platforms shape the role for us. And listen, they are actively doing this. They are paying people to use AI, paying students to use AI, all kinds of things. This is where the business goes. They have to make money. How will we change our orientation? For instance, how will we evaluate students? How do we then get assurance of learning? Or do we do exams? Or do we evaluate students? And it takes us back to the squeeze. I'm wrapping up here because it takes us back to the squeeze. The squeeze is, as we said before, government funding, and tend to fund us per head of students, right? No, they don't? Oh, they've stopped that? Okay, so you don't know where you're getting that. Okay, which makes it even worse. So we go back to the squeeze, because what we're seeing now is there's a squeeze with, do students really think that they need to come to a university to get an education? Do they need to come to a university to pursue their career goals, or can they do that otherwise? And therefore, what are we offering those students? Well, that's only one part of the story. You then have the other part of the story in which the demand for our students. To what extent then our companies saying, listen, we want what you're producing. And where should that skill level be? Because that's a huge thing. No, where should the skill level be? Persons just coming out of high school, the expectation is much different. A former student from here who says, who does coding, he says he does not want any entry-level coder because the platform can do it for him. And he does the troubleshooting, so he does not want any entry-level coder. The question, therefore, is at what level is entry-level in the future? Go back 1 minute for me there. Will these factors result in the reduction in the size of universities in Jamaica, consolidation in the industry? And maybe beyond the scope of this discussion, we should look at the socio-economic factors that may impact the labor market. This is something that we really have to look at, and we should not, as academics and policymakers, wait for this to happen. These are things that we should anticipate. Ladies and gentlemen, that's our presentation of our findings.
Thank you, Professor Goldin and Dr. Clark. So, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it, the findings of this bit of timely research, AI readiness in higher education. I did say at the onset that I wasn't sure why Professor Goldin asked me to chair, but then I must now confess that I was quite happy when he asked me because AI is something I've been keenly following in terms of its advent and impact on education and the society at large, human society. I did say as well at the onset that a university occupies a special place in society. It is a place and a space expressly dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge and to advance human understanding. And this particular phenomenon, generative AI, is what we have been given this afternoon in terms of insights into it. I do want to get into the Q&A segment momentarily, but before I do that, could you please allow me a little bit of indulgence to recognize in the audience Professor Colin Giles, former acting president of the University of Technology, Jamaica, and current president of the University of the Commonwealth Caribbean. It's a pleasure to have you here, Professor Giles. We also have as well Mr. Cordell Green, the executive director of the Broadcasting Commission, and a partner of UTech in research. He has partnered with UTech and Professor Goldin in research, teens, and technology. So welcome, Mr. Green. Mr. Fillmore McCarthy, principal of Exed Community College, has joined us as well. And there he is, lounging beside Professor Sean Thorpe, the Dean of the Faculty of Engineering and Computing. They're both computer experts, you know, so what they say about birds of a feather? So there they are. And we have as well Professor Garnet Sinclair Mirage, Associate Dean of the School of Advanced Management here at UTech as well. And Dr. Granville Peter joined us. He's the acting dean of our Faculty of Education and Liberal Studies. I'm going to take just a few questions before we go into the panel discussion. But my interest in AI, and I've been following it, so since I have the microphone, take MC's privilege to just say this. There was this particular article by Len Shackleton in the UK Telegraph newspaper on May 7th. 2025 while our researchers were doing their study and crunching the numbers. And he asserted that the traditional university system is becoming obsolete, largely due to the rise of AI tools like ChatGPT. And he went on to say that this may ultimately be a good thing, because he argued that universities have long been in decline, plagued by financial instability, grade inflation, weak assessments, and irrelevant degrees. And that AI has now exposed how meaningless many forms of coursework and online exams have become. And he suggested that unless universities return to rigorous assessment methods like in-person or oral exams, they will continue to lose credibility. And he concluded that a shrinking, more practical, and skill-focused higher education system fueled by AI-driven change would be a better and more honest use of resources. So then, that bit of food for thought there to add to what Professor Golding and Dr. Clark gave us. Are there any questions, ladies and gentlemen, members of the audience? Any pressing question based on the rich data you saw presented? Okay, Professor Sinclair Barrage, and the microphone will come to you momentarily. Oh, yes, certainly. Yes, I should say that. Step up to the microphone when you have your question. I see Dr. White is assisting as well. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, so Professor Golding and Dr. Clark, congratulations. Well done. My question is, Professor Golding, this study finds that, we are proposing or projecting based on the findings or the statistics that females may be more impacted by AI in terms of job retention. But I'm wondering if the association, if you could further the study to look at the association or any potential impact of AI on entrepreneurship. Because the way I'm seeing it, if there is this impact on job retention, the 2023 GEM statistics show that more females in Jamaica are involved in entrepreneurial activities. So I'm wondering if there could be any association, if you could further the study in the future to have a look at that.
Okay, and I also hope that in the discussion, the panel discussion, this may be addressed. Maybe something that you want to address to the panelists who have far more foresight than we do. We just deal with data. They have foresight.
Yes, thank you, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes, please come. No? Any other questions online? I think the presentation format was so clear that you have gotten the takeaways, and so there is clarity. Mr. McCarthy, as well thereafter, Dr. Peter.
Good afternoon, colleagues. I just want to first of all commend, Professor Golden and his team for the rich presentation. But the question I have has to do with whether or not AI is really a squeeze, as you describe it, or is it an opportunity for change?
I think it's both. I think it is an opportunity for change. What we anticipate, though, is that it is going to squeeze from the way we are now structured. That's the anticipation. So it is going to change. So there's opportunity here for change. I just don't think that wholesale education, because at one stage we went into real wholesale education, and as much multiple choice questions as you could possibly do, push people through. I think those days are done. I don't think that's going to happen anymore. And we start seeing that from COVID still, in which we know that, well, okay, we couldn't use this, or we shouldn't have used that method during COVID to assess persons. So I think it's both that it is opportunity, but I don't think the model that we have now is going to be sustainable long term. I think there was a follow-up question.
Yes. No, I just wanted to say that our current model really is not sustainable when you have a situation where 19% of your population is at the tertiary level, and currently you find that less than 15% of the persons employed don't have a higher education certification. So the current model, I believe, is not sustainable in the way that we are approaching higher education. So this AI, generative AI tool, to transform that approach, to have more for people being exposed to tertiary level education, and maybe the approach that we use to teach currently is what actually needs to change to embrace this technology, because one recognized that, I recall when the typewriter came about, persons were frantic, sector will have to go.
You were around that time, right?
And guess what? We have learned to use it as a tool to increase productivity, increase automation, and today we're a better society. So is it that we need to start to explore what are the positive gains and how we can use that?
Point taken, and I'm curious as to how, again, I pass this to the panel, to how the panel sees this. There was another question?
Thank you, Professor Golding and Dr. Clark. Could you expound on the detection rate and its impact on quality assurance at the tertiary level?
Well, the detection rate is very low. Almost 94% of the persons said they have never been detected. And if that is the case, it should have a negative impact on quality assurance. I need to just mention something else. That same example that I gave with the students, the final assignment, I said, take it home. But you must tell me what was the process that you used to give me the output. I wanted to know if you use any of the generative AI, and what was the prompt, what you didn't use at all, and you submit that with your output. And let me tell you what happened. Let me tell you what I noticed. It's the students who were good students remain good students, right? There was marginal drop-off. And some of them just wrote to say, I didn't use anything. So what you saw with those students is that they remained good, giving you good output. The people who were highly reliant on the technology were the ones who fall off the cliff. It's so easy to mark a paper that only had 37% grade versus a higher grade.
Thank you, Prof. Golding, and thank you, persons who asked questions. In the interest of time, we have to go to the next segment. Sorry, I can't take all the questions. And to the last point that was made, the co-thinking with AI is one of the new constructs that have come about as well. And the argument goes that what we should look at AI as is something that will amplify human expertise by becoming a partner. So I'm going to do a button change, mic change. So I'm going to hand over to Dr. Barrett to do the moderating for the panel discussion segment. And I tell you who she is. Dr. Barrett is a lecturer in the School of Business Administration here in the College of Business and Management at UTech. She's a chair of the Quality Assurance Committee, as well as the Corporate Education Coordinator. Prior to joining UTech, Dr. Barrett served as an information technology manager for over 12 years in financial and media organizations. There, in those positions, she spearheaded major IT transformations. So she's eminently qualified for transformational scenarios, such as we're talking about in relation to artificial intelligence and its impact on our industry, the higher education sector. Dr. Barrett, over to you. Please make her welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Ivy. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. All protocols observed, and to those who are online. So as Dr. Ivy indicated, I will be the moderator for this segment of the program. And so as the moderator, my aim is to facilitate a lively discussion. So I'm putting the gentlemen on their toes. So one female, several gentlemen, right? And also to ensure that we end on time. So the agenda for this segment, is as follows. Our panelists will share their thoughts on the study's themes, which include readiness gaps and strategic integration. Thereafter, we will open up the discussion to the audience, to those who are online, as well as to those in person, to ask questions to our panelists. And for those who are online, we invite you to post your questions in the chat, and those questions will be asked during the question and answer section. And for those who are here in person, I'm going to invite you at the appropriate time to use the mic, state your name, your organization, and to move directly into the questions. So yes, my training in IT makes me very sharp. We go straight into the meat of the matter. Following the question and answer segment, our panelists will share their final thoughts, and then I'll hand over to our MC. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's indeed my pleasure to introduce to you our panelists. First, please join me in welcoming Dr. Kevin Brown, President of the University of Technology. The center, please. So Dr. Brown has been a trailblazer in academia and the aerospace industry for over 18 years. He's a technical expert in complex and integrated aerospace structural system design. So he's a thought leader in his field. Next, please help me to welcome Professor Andrew Spencer, President of the Caribbean Maritime University. Professor Spencer, who in 2024 was conferred the Order of Distinction in the rank of Commander, has served in executive leadership posts in academia across the Caribbean, as well as in corporate entities. Our third panelist is Professor Daniel Kaur, Professor of Computer Studies at the University of the West Indies, Mona. Professor Kaur's primary research interests are in amorphous computing, robotics and automation, and computer science education. So he lectures both at the graduate and the undergraduate level at the University of the West Indies. Our fourth panelist is Mr. David Mayers. Mr. Mayers is the Senior Standards Development Officer at the University Council of Jamaica. Mr. Mayers' experience spans a range of technical and academic roles across the English-speaking Caribbean, with demonstrated excellence in areas such as change management, standardization, and policy development. And finally, but not the least, because very critical for our discussion, is Mr. Hugh Thompson. Mr. Thompson is a director in consulting at PricewaterhouseCoopers, Jamaica. So Mr. Thompson brings over 23 years of experience in technology, consulting, audit, risk assurance across the public and private sector in the Caribbean as well as Jamaica. So ladies and gentlemen, our panelists. Gentlemen, we have all heard the findings of the study as well as key takeaways, both for industry, academia, and definitely for UCJ as we look at standards. And so my first question is to the university leaders and academics, Dr. Brown, Professor Spencer, and Professor Kaur. Are Jamaican universities effectively leading the adoption and implementation of generative artificial intelligence while maintaining academic integrity? Or are they reacting too slowly to a shift that is already changing the work environment as well as higher education? So Dr. Brown, then Professor Spencer, and then Professor Kaur.
Thank you, moderator. Thank you.
Testing one. Check one,
Okay.
two.
Thank you, moderator. First of all, let me just congratulate Professor Golding and Dr. Clark for the awesome research that they have presented here today. Recently, you would have seen the government of Jamaica and their presentation on our national readiness for AI, but I think this adds the data behind that research in terms of higher education, or well, across the school system, I should say, because it covers high schools as well as tertiary. So I congratulate you and I thank you for this piece of research. Our university is ready. I would say that from a UTech perspective, we are getting ready. We have been looking at AI and looking at how we can best prepare for AI, because AI is like an inflection point. Many of you forget that, or maybe when you think about something like the wheel, it's quite a ubiquitous thing now, right? We don't even think about it that much. We just take it for granted that the wheel has taken us so far as a species, and we get into a car, we use a car. But what do I say to you, that as useful as a car is, it's also one of the least safest ways to travel. One of the safest ways to travel statistically is to fly. So my point is that we're now in the age of AI, And like the wheel, most likely AI is here to stay. It will have pros and cons. There'll be very good things about it, but also challenges that we must face. From a university perspective, we started by looking at two key things. One is, do we have the appropriate policies to enable an appropriate introduction of AI at the university? And I say introduction because, quite frankly, it's here, whether we like it or not. So how do we manage AI in the teaching and learning space and in our business operations? And that's why we, first of all, established a policy. We have an AI policy, and I know the data that said around 40-something% of our academics weren't aware that we were developing or have an AI policy. So clearly, a lot more communication, better change management needs to happen at the university. But we do have an AI policy. And in developing that AI policy, the attempt was to be progressive, meaning that we will allow students to use AI. And if you read the AI policy, we even went as far as to say for a particular discipline, this is how much AI we will accept. And we then also have, as an addendum, a declaration form, much like the examples given by Professor Golden, where students are meant to fill in this declaration form, stating how much AI they used as a percentage in the work, and also to tell us the prompts used. But I would say that we're still analyzing whether the policy and the schedule, the addendum for them to declare is working. We have not been so prescriptive with respect to faculty. And I hear many stories of how faculties are or are not using AI. Some have embraced it, some have put it into their teaching and learning activities in the classroom, in their assessments. And we're listening and looking at the success rates and the outcomes for those who have embraced it. In our business operations, it's clearly evident, because we're all receiving emails that we can see people have been using AI to structure, and we're receiving proposals and documents where you can sense that AI has been used, which is fine. It is what it is. But I would say that we are still getting ready. We're still learning. And from an IT perspective, you just heard about the risk around Anthropic's mythos, right? So we are now having to, when that was announced, I quickly rang our head of IT because I'm like, are we ready for this? So even in terms of our cybersecurity, we're now having to look at that. So it's not just about teaching and learning. It's the entire operational framework of the institution that we're looking at. And I would say that in terms of readiness, it's an ongoing activity.
All right, yes, thank you. So again, I want to echo what President Brown just said. Congrats to the principal investigator and the co-investigator for focusing on such a critical issue confronting all of us, not just in HEIs. The question from the moderator is, she says she's targeted, so let me attempt to do the same. Is the state of readiness, are we doing enough already, or are we behind the eighth ball? And my simple answer is that we already started late. And my sense is, and this is what happens when you have forward-thinking leaders like Dr. Brown, is that we have the policy in place as well. The idea is you have to have a framework within which you operate. So that's our guiding principle. Now, the problem, though, is that it's now a debate about who is the smartest in the room. Is it the instructor, is it the student, or is it Gen AI? And that's the constant fight in all of our rooms. Who is capitalizing on Gen AI more? And I hear, for example, some of the ethical considerations that Prof. Golding introduced as a takeaway, one of his questions. It's quite thought-provoking. But let's be clear, my friends in the room. The AI, and we all know it, is not new. Yes? In fact, the place where I work, the CMU, has been using AI for a long time. A long time. We have simulators of all kinds which we've been using. And this was long before it was sexy. So I know, for example, President Brown always says, UTech was always STEM before STEM was a buzzword. And the same is true. We've been using the technology. Now, Gen AI, which is a key distinction, is something that I think caught us flat-footed. And we are racing hard to catch up and to keep pace. Now, here's the thing that confronted me most profoundly recently. President Brown and I were in a room where we were having a conversation about the alignment of university priorities. I think what AI has done to us and probably for us is to get us to go back to our core. It's to get us to go back to why we were all created. It is reducing you're talking about the mass production of the graduate. It is reducing that idea that we can somehow do what we want to do when we want to do it because we feel to do it. There is now a demand from the perspective of resources. We responded to you from the audience that we don't get per student anymore. It's block grant funding, which is usually static over many years, and you're expected to find the rest through fees and other revenue streams. So then the question becomes, how do we increase that revenue stream? Well, certainly, how do we increase the block grant funding? It is to make ourselves absolutely relevant and true to our core mandate. That idea of being loose and frivolous and all over the place is a thing of the past. I think that's one change we're going to see quite rapidly. The other thing is that this idea and this conversation about being replaced by the technology is not a new one. 15 years ago, when I was doing a PhD, my entire thesis was on the disintermediation of travel agencies. And I give you a joke. While I'm up here, if you saw me on my phone, I was messaging my travel agent just now about a flight. And it's not that I'm averse to booking flights online. I booked one online last week, but this one is a little technical, so I called my travel agent. And so it then, back to your point, principal investigator, what then becomes entry level? Because the reason I call my travel agency is I consider her to be a particular kind of expert. I'm not going to call any travel agent. She has a particular thing that I, in this moment, can't do. And so she has differentiated herself and positioned herself to coexist with the thing I have access to. And so we go back to the conversation about are universities ready? I think we are as ready as we could have been given when we started to realize this was a real thing. That's a fact. So the moment it struck us that this was something that was here to stay, and as you say, generative AI continues to reproduce itself. It is, every time we think that something has become pervasive, it then becomes more deeply pervasive. And so what's happening to us now is that we've recognized the importance of it, and we're playing catch up. And that's why studies like these are important, because the provocation that comes from getting us to talk about these things and to do more is where we ought to be. I mean, I have some more things to say, but I'm following my moderator's lead. Thank you.
Thank you. And once again, excellent presentation and very useful information. To get straight to the question, the University of the West Indies began its process of policy development in 2023, right on the back of the launch of ChatGPT from OpenAI in November 2022. And in the first iteration of that, I happen to be a co-author of the policy and the sort of position statement. I articulated many of it. I can't say echo because that was before I heard it here, but the point I made that AI is going to be, it's more than just about our students using it when they shouldn't, which is how the need for the policy sort of arose. And the point I made is that the way that this tool is progressing, you're going to see it used in all your walks of your operation. So right now you're looking at teaching and learning, but it's going to affect everything. And so I actually pushed back on trying to develop a single policy. I said, you actually need to update all your policies. And rather what we need to do is adopt a position statement. So we did that, a position statement that says we anticipate, we embrace the use of generative AI responsibly. But we anticipate that there are many threats, and so we seek to do so in a way that mitigates those threats. And that's sort of the setup. There are 5 campuses across UWI, so it takes a while for anything to actually take hold. So by 2024, that was the position. But the leadership came back and said, no, this doesn't sound like what other universities are doing. We need a policy. So now we actually do have a policy, and it ended up being called a policy framework because it does the following things. First, it recognizes that there's no way that there's any policy process in any institution that can keep pace with the kinds of changes that the technology is producing. What you know are the capabilities of AI last month, they're different now. And no matter how you want to measure them, there are several benchmarks we can get into. Some of the conversation about what the students know and who's the smartest in the room. At this point, we're now at the stage we're developing benchmarks that the number of humans that can actually answer those questions is like a tiny, tiny, tiny proportion of the people across the earth. There's an exam called the Humanities Last Exam. That's its benchmark that sort of set up the stuff. Okay, when the AI is beating it, right now the best AIs are scoring like 37% on that. They say when the AIs are scoring at the 90s and above on this, forget it. That's it. They've outpaced us in everything that we've ever produced. But that's a separate point about the capability. The point I'm making is that it evolved so fast that we recognized that what we had to do was develop a framework that would enable for guidance to be able to be adapted quickly and still retain the authority of the approval process. And so we developed a framework that would make that happen. And that's actually that was approved. 2025 is just being implemented. So the question you ask is, are we moving fast enough and have we moved soon enough? And I would say we began the process as soon as reasonably we could, but I can't sit here and say, yeah, man, we're on pace as we should. I think perhaps we could have. I will confess that I think we probably should have had that implemented already. On the other hand, though, I think it's a good thing that we're being deliberate about this, because in spite of the policy already being adopted formally across all these 5 campuses that happened last year, we still get people don't know. People don't know exactly what's okay. People don't know what's not okay. And I just want to add, so it takes time, and it's actually not a bad thing that there are lots of conversations around what's supposed to happen. And once you have the policy in place, many times things arise, and you can say, you know, that the policy actually says that this is how things should happen. And that enables people to engage and say, oh, I didn't even realize that that's in there. And so it helps them to go back. And I think through that mechanism, you get better uptake. Because if you simply have a sort of one-time edict, a few people hear it, a few people don't, and then people tend to generally follow what they see other people do rather than go back to the reference. And so this process of sort of slowly going, and every time an incident occurs, they can go back and say, you know, the framework actually dealt with this. It makes people wake up to the things that were sort of foresighted within that policy. So I don't necessarily complain too much that it is unfolding slowly. I think there are positives to take away from that. Thank you.
Thank you. So basically, from what I'm understanding, is that the universities have started because, and this is very critical, because society looks at the university in terms of leading and for guidance with regards to new initiatives or new changes that are taking place, whether those changes impact locally or regionally or globally. And so they're always looking at the universities for its input and guidance. And so it's interesting that, and a key takeaway is that our universities have started, but there's still work to do. Now I want to turn to Mr. Mayers. And why Mr. Mayers is because Mr. Mayers is from UCJ. And UCJ has been talking a lot about AI literacy as a quality standard for higher education institutions. So in 2023, UCJ had the Dennis Irwin lecture, and the theme was artificial intelligence, a paradigm shift for quality assurance in higher eds. Then 2 years later, UCJ had its symposium, and that's in 2025. And it's speaking about upskilling for the future. That's the AI literacy as a quality standard for higher ed. And so my question, Mr. Mayers, is this. AI enables highly personalized learning experiences. But when we look at quality assurance and quality standards, it requires standardization. All these requires a standard way of assessing things. So how can higher education balance these two priorities without compromising academic standards?
Good evening. Thank you for that question. Much food for thought. But first, I just want to commend the panelists, the researchers actually, for their data and information. It actually sparked some thoughts within my mind relative to the question you're asking. And that is, again, the UCJ remains committed to assuring quality within various tertiary spaces. That requires a very developmental approach, working with many of the institutions, engaging them in many different forums. Interestingly, that you mentioned the Dennis Irvin lecture, Professor Kaur featured on that one, and also within the QA week, the annual QA week that we have, the focus on AI literacy. Now, the thing about QA frameworks is that we always look at them as this monolith that is there to stand tall and be almost like a lighthouse on the shore, guiding different activities into a safe space. And whilst that's true in the way in which QA developed over the years, what we're realizing now is that as institutions continue to be more flexible to utilize AI and other technologies within all aspects of their operations, they have to maintain a commitment to diversity and inclusion. And that means diversifying teaching and learning, assessment models, as well as recruitment practices, professional development. And so there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. What the UCJ likes to say is that we're not prescriptive in the fact that we're not telling institutions what they must do, but we're guiding you in the ways that you can operate to maintain that benchmark of quality, to ensure that all stakeholders, whether it's the governments that are providing the funding, as well as the students who are paying their way per credit through their tuition, as well as the faculty who help to build the academic research and excellence within those institutions, they all have a part to play within that standardization process. But remembering that there's a diversity and a difference in how each student learns and what we must recognize as output within those spaces. So to answer your point in a final way is that what we've realized is that the QA frameworks moving forward have to look beyond just the program outputs and the program outcomes, but look in the ways in which artificial intelligence is being used ethically and fairly across the board. Something that we're currently developing in the final stages is some ethical guidelines for higher education institutions. Now, this will follow, again, much of the work that the institutions have already been doing in putting their policy frameworks in place. Mind you, by the way, in 2022, we would have updated our institutional accreditation standards to include references to ChatGPT and generative AI. So we were quite close in terms of prompting the institutions, hello, something's coming, you need to pay attention, but they also were on the pulse. So getting back to it, it's that what we're saying is that the focus now is going to have to be on ethical use and how we responsibly use it fairly, because it's not going anywhere. Like the wheel that we've taken for granted now is on every car. AI is being used from high school or before. So how does that affect matriculation? How is that affecting the quality of student that's coming into tertiary education? And the standards that we apply for admissions, for the quality of students, for faculty. So the UCJ has a role to play moving forward in terms of working with the institutions to make sure that we don't take for granted that we've arrived, but that we will be consistently moving with the technology.
Thank you. And so I'm sure we're all eager to hear from the industry. So, Mr. Thompson, PwC is already deploying AI solutions such as GL AI. And in the presentation earlier, we heard about, and Professor Golden looked at one point and he says accounting, you know, and we have here at UTech our largest school. In fact, our largest college is the College of Business and Management. And so PwC at this point has been deploying GL AI. And this system is an expert level system, and it processes volumes of data in real time. So what does it mean for the role and relevance of graduates in accounting? Because yes, we're putting in policies, but then we're looking at the output, which are the students. And these students need to be hired. And so we want to create work-ready students. So what does it mean for these roles, accounting, business, finance, and the related fields?
Boy, that's a tough question. Right, but what I can say in terms of the industry and what it's requiring in terms of the students coming out is one, AI fluency. And it was mentioned by one of the panelists here that it has to be a candidate requirement to be AI fluent, just like numeracy, just like writing, just like critical thinking. It has to be a skill set that they're leaving the university with, which will equip them to learn how to use AI ethically and use it in a way that will contribute to the organization. Now, in terms of these tools that we're deploying or helping clients to deploy, at the end of the day, one of the key concerns as well is whether or not the persons looking at the output are exercising the appropriate judgment, right? Because you need to be able to interpret and critically review these results, because we know about drifts, bias, all that sort of stuff. And even in how you prompt a generative AI engine, it will give you what you want to hear, not what is the right thing to hear, right? So you need to have that critical judgment to be able to assess it, know when to use it and when not to use AI, right? And therefore also be able to, well, what I'd say is that goes back to a key element that I believe all educators are concerned about. Are we eroding that critical thinking of our students? And it's the same thing the industry cares about. So we can't be, and we've seen where persons have put results out, but they're garbage. And that comes from the fact that the persons who are doing it weren't able to critically and ethically assess and use the tool in a way that will make it beneficial ultimately. So I believe while we're deploying these things, the human element, and we're not going to go into autonomous agents at this point, right? But the human element right now needs to understand how to interpret the results, know how to use or when to use the tools, right? And use it in a way that will get you to the ultimate outcome.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Following up on that question, and I pose it back to the university leaders and academics. Given that what is required is tools that will help us to interpret results and to use these tools effectively, ethically. So what does a future-ready graduate actually looks like in the age of AI? And are we currently on track to produce such a graduate?
Well, this is why UTech has always been an institution that listens to industry, because I believe Mr. Thompson, who is from industry, has just described the graduate he wants. And I think many of the things he has said are applicable across several industrial sectors. But I want to say this, though, that people of my age and older probably have an advantage insofar as we didn't grow up with the AI, and I believe it gives us a bit of a critical eye. You know, whether we consciously or subconsciously realize it, I'm sure when you use things like ChatGPT, you know, you look at it and think, this makes sense, you know, and you know, so I think the challenge for us, though, is for the young people who are growing up with AI, how do you still get them to have that critical assessment as you have now said you want in the graduates? So you're saying, look, you said two things, you know, Mr. Thompson. You said you want a AI fluent graduate, but you also said you want a graduate that will have the ability to be a critical thinker, to really look at the results and analyze it in a way that doesn't just depend on the result that they're getting from the tool, the AI tool. You want a graduate with good cognitive skills, right? And so the challenge for us is, how do we give you all of that, but at the same time expose them to the AI? And AI, by the way, that the university has no control over, meaning that whether we like it or not, the student has access to it. So I would say the steps we're taking right now are, we're looking at our curriculum intensively. We're seeing how we can actually produce that graduate, right? And that's something that we're working towards. And there's a lot of work being done now across the institution to see how we can integrate AI into the curriculum. We have an applied AI degree for those who wish to specialize in that topic. But outside of that degree program, we're looking at all the disciplines to see how it will fit together based on what industry has and continues to demand.
Yeah, thank you. I found it a little interesting when our good friend from the UCJ says that they're not being prescriptive and they won't tell us what to do until it becomes a requirement for accreditation, right? And I actually see the central role of AI. And I say the central role of AI now, even though some still think it's peripheral, and I think you do so at your own peril. And I was surprised at one of the findings, Prof. Golding. It was kind of counterintuitive that many felt that they were getting through undetected. In fact, I would have thought that they would have complained about over-detection, right? Because everybody assumes AI, even in cases where they claim it's not AI. And so we talk about the critical eye, as Dr. Brown did just now. But to the question you asked, and also to something the researchers said, this business of AI is discipline agnostic, right? So it really didn't matter what people were studying. The responses across the board were similar. Now then the question becomes, is it industry agnostic? And I think at varied paces, depending on where you are in a small island developing state, you'll see a different level of penetration. So, for example, if she will allow me, my wife's own doctoral study focused on hospitality and HEI readiness compared to industry demands. And one of the things that kept coming up was that, you know, with the exception of two particular hotel brands in Jamaica, most others were still focusing on the high touch, right? So they were trying as hard as they could to stay away from too much infusion of technology in their space. And the two that were doing it were saying, yeah, that's what we want, but you know, we are kind of in the minority, so we're taking what we can get. And I think the danger is that the HEIs, and incidentally, her sample included all three of these public universities of here. The danger is that the responses out of the HEI space seem to suggest that because in the particular industry, we were not being told that this particular thing was critically important to them now, that we were not necessarily too preoccupied with it. The problem with that is that there's a timeline for a degree. The problem with that is that there's going to be a lag effect. And tomorrow when industry says, we are ready for this, we are 10 years behind because we haven't changed the curriculum sufficiently yet. So President Brown, forward thinker, and others who understand this thing are trying to get ahead of it. And I'm very excited. I mean, my team at CMU is very focused on it. In fact, we don't even have an IT department. We have a digital transformation space. That's how we conceptualize it. And to my mind, if we don't have that pro-innovation posture, the challenge we're going to have is that we are always going to be playing the catch-up that we were speaking about earlier. We're doing some research now. In fact, so CMU had, I think, the first artificial intelligence degree in the Caribbean. We're not doing victory laps. But it's easy now to kind of diffuse and export some of that from that degree into our other spaces. And whether we want to be deliberate about teaching it or not and getting them ready, as UCJ and PwC are telling us, it's happening organically anyway. They are getting ready on their own. Now, whether we're able to formalize that in a serious way is the real question. And so the last thing I'll say is that we're doing some research now in partnership with the World Maritime University on XR, which is, everybody in this room is familiar with that, extended reality, kind of the umbrella thing for virtual, augmented reality, etc. And there's now a debate about when Gen AI and XR come together, what that powerful and potent monster looks like, with one being sort of the brain and the mind for the generation, and the other being the interactive component that pulls it all together. Now, I'm interested to see what this research will reveal. We expect the findings in another 3 to 4 months because the data has been collected in Barcelona. But the idea in my mind is, if we can master that and leverage it for the greater access that we're talking about. I keep saying this everywhere I go, even if we think the model is going to change, until industry absolutely says, and it will probably get there, that we no longer want these formal degrees you guys are churning out. We do not want them anymore. And that's a long way away, I think, but who knows? Then we're going to always be in the business of trying to balance this thing about analytical abilities, critical thinking, and the ability to be not just AI literate, but AI competent. And so I think as we try to do that, we have to think of that in the context of a developing country dilemma and how we move the nation forward. And maybe it is that AI is not the enemy. Maybe Gen AI is actually the tool that has come to enable us to move from this 20+% access to HEIs. That's a problem. President Brown knows it. President Colin Giles knows it. Professor Kaur knows it, that we can't even begin to have a conversation about becoming a developed country until your access is above 40%. We're so far from that. And so I think that that's one of the things. We need to be able to leverage the tool and see how we embrace, incorporate, rather than to be afraid and run for the hills.
Thanks. I think one of the most important things that we need to do as tertiary level institutions, actually all levels of educational institutions need to do this, is to figure out which of the competencies that we've gotten so accustomed to teaching under normal circumstances need to migrate to being taught with AI as an assistant. So in other words, if we look at it just from the standpoint of what AI can do, there is no exam that you could reasonably give an undergraduate that an AI couldn't ace completely. And therefore, this is not about, can we change the questions we're asking our student that the AI couldn't answer? That's a futile pursuit, and in fact, perhaps the wrong direction to take. At the end of the day, as we've heard, and you all would have known, AI not going away, and you do see tremendous potential for productivity improvements. And therefore, in fact, what our objective really ought to be is, how do we ensure that graduates that enter the labor market can take it to a transformative place so that what they're doing is exercising a higher competitive advantage through the prudent and responsible use of AI within those same contexts that they might be pursuing. So it's not about having accountants that stayed away from AI or were blocked. It's about having accountants that know exactly how to use the AI to do 6 times the work that those are not using AI doing it. And likewise, in my own discipline in computer science, there's no exercise that I could give a student that's a coding exercise that couldn't be efficiently done in seconds by one of these AI tools. Does that mean that software developers go away? No. What actually, the same company, in fact, there are companies that acted very quickly, fired a bunch of people and said, well, maybe we'll just have AI do this. And now they're rehiring some of them to come back because guess what? The code that gets generated is very difficult to manage, very difficult to maintain. And what you're kind of getting is this sort of mess of when you use the AI without being in charge, you get things, you lose control. And in the context that it gets used, it needs to expand, and therefore you now need to sort of bring it back. So ultimately, our biggest challenge, and this is an open question, it's not going to be answered this afternoon, it's actually probably not even going to be answered within the next few years. It's something that's going to be evolving on an ongoing basis. Which of those competencies that we currently teach need to migrate? And those that don't migrate, as in, because it's not everything, and I'll give you a good example. So we have to figure out 2 things. Which of them need to migrate? And then we'll change our curricula to become how you're going to use AI as a kind of assistive tool to accomplish those same things. And then the other things that we say, no, we can't afford for that to move, we have to figure out how we're going to assess it. Because we need to have valid assessments. And I'll give you an example that I use in other contexts whenever this comes up. There is no question in anatomy, human anatomy, that you could ask that the AI couldn't answer. Even the free ones, the ones you could go and ask. No question. And I'm talking most advanced anatomy, not just some basic anatomy. At the same time, I would never want, so one temptation is, well, if the AI can do it, why do you need students to learn it? I would never want a surgeon standing there who'd never finished that anatomy course because the AI could do it, wondering where that scalpel is supposed to land when they're about to make that first cut. You don't want that. And so even though those competencies are more than well mastered by AI, they serve as building blocks. And there are higher level competencies that we need our humans to have that they're building on top of. And so that's just an example, but I think we have to do that in every discipline, everywhere, at every level. And I'm talking now tertiary level because that's where my focus is, but I actually believe that you could take that principle down and apply it at secondary level, primary level, because if we accept that AI is this all-powerful, very powerful tool, it behooves us to enable even our youngest children to understand its dangers, understand how to use it responsibly. So that's, I think, the challenge, not just for higher level education, but in fact, all the levels.
All levels. Thank you, Professor Kaur. At this time, I'm inviting the audience for any questions. And for those who are in person, please state your name. So please, I'm inviting you to the mic, state your name, your organization, and you go directly into the question.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Andrea Sutherland from the University of the Commonwealth Caribbean and UTech. But my question is, so we are speaking a lot about AI, and I don't think it's something that is going away. And we see even now, even in high schools, we have basically programs that are crafted for individual students. So I think we're moving to an age where we won't have brick and mortar anymore. People customize the learning is going to be the future. So the thing, though, is that we have a lot of misinformation as well as disinformation all in that space. So as higher education institutions, are we ready? We produce a lot of that information. We know what is accurate. We know what is false. The population out there does not know that. Are we ready to be able to create that information and ensure that what is going to those we teach is accurate? They will know how to use AI. I don't think we need to teach them that. What they will need to know is what is accurate and how do I get accurate information. Thank you.
Mic check. Okay. Right. I think I did mention that that's going to be important. How do you get the students to exercise that critical eye and not just put a prompt in, get an answer, and say aha, and submit it as the answer, right? With no scrutiny, no sort of assessment of where are the references. Because remember, for example, in ChatGPT, if you don't tell it to give you the references, it doesn't. And sometimes when you ask ChatGPT for the references, it's quite disappointing where it actually goes to get them, right? Well, for an academic, because so you'd want that deeper analysis, and it's not quite happening. So that I think, Dr. Sutherland, is going to be the big challenge, and I'm not sure I have an answer for that. Because the knee-jerk reaction would be to say, well, don't let them use it. But that's impossible. No, it's so accessible that you can't stop it. But I think if you listen to Professor Golden and the examples he gave as an academic and how he has been testing out different ways of assessing his students, I think that's what every academic is going to have to do. That you're going to have to say, you know what? Guys, come into the class and do the assessment. I'm not going to give you an essay, homework, or give me an oral presentation. You're going to have to literally challenge the students to still try and memorize things, to be critical in their assessment. I did have a quick question for Prof. Golden on that point, though, and then I'll hand the mic to Prof. Spencer. It's kind of related. Prof, you said that in your study, the study showed that respondents felt it enhanced their critical skills. Am I right? There was I believe, let me look at my notes. Right, you felt it, they felt it enhanced their critical thinking skills. That alone, I think, is a research on its own, because I think that they perceived it did. I don't think it necessarily actually happened. In other words, they may have enhanced an email using the tool, and now that the email sounds rather right. Yeah, it sounds eloquent and no errors and all the rest of it. And so there's a perception. Aha, I feel like I'm brighter. But I would argue it's a perception, because what would you do without the tool? Could you repeat that? So it'd be interesting to get your opinion on that outcome where people perceive that AI made them, quote unquote, brighter.
Right. Let me just respond quickly to Dr. Sutherland. So you said most of it. The one thing I would say is I believe that Gen AI has actually come for us to all elevate our games. That's what it is. We have to step the game up. And what does that mean? It means that we are gone are the days when the cookie cutter generic approaches to anything will work. If you really don't want to use biblical terms, no, separate the sheep from the goat. That will not play well. So let me go for, if you want to separate those who are critical thinkers from those who are not, it's going to require multiple things. It's going to require a change in how you engage in your classroom setting. Your delivery has to be tailored. Your assessment, for sure, this thing, so Prof spoke about the multiple choice. I'm not even going to go to multiple choice. I'm going to go to years ago when I was actively in the classroom, a bank of questions I had. A bank of essay questions and short answer questions. And depending when you came, I'm recycling them from 7 years ago and bringing them back. That is not going to be the way forward. And I think that the creativity that will now need to emerge from us to elevate that game, to make sure that the information that you speak of is that which can be validated as being, academically sound is another thing. And it's no different from what social media did to traditional news, Yeah, you could get your news from anywhere now, right? Leave him alone. It's no different. And so it came down now to a matter of credibility, right? So where do I want to get my credible information? I can get all kinds of information anywhere, anytime at my fingertips. But credibility is what it's going to come down to. And so it's about elevating the game to be able to make sure that we are the arbiters. We are the ones who understand. We are the ones who are producing and pointing people to that which is sound academically.
If I may, when we did the study among high school students, one of the critical things that they wanted to learn was how to authenticate. Yeah. Okay, when we did the study with high school students, one of the critical things that they wanted to know was how to authenticate information. And that's very, very understandable because, as you say, there is so much quote unquote information out there. And that is for them to learn, they will have to be able to critically analyze stuff. If not, they are going to be misled and misled further. One thing I learned very early in teaching is that if I taught somebody something incorrect, it gets multiplied. And therefore, I took the responsibility that, well, boy, listen, I'm going to know as much as possible. And if I don't know, I'm going to let you know I don't know. And what happens now, then persons will look up to an authority figure to say, this is where I'm getting the information from. That authority figure now becomes something online. And students now will have to be able to determine, okay, does this make sense? How do I critically analyze? And if seeing that I have the mic, there's a question that I want to ask, especially of you, is how do you see the market, the labor market changing as a result of the widespread use of AI? We see in other markets where they are laying off a whole bunch of people, especially in IT. And in consultancy, where do you see the labor market going with this change taking place?
Right. So I think I kind of touched on it earlier, but what we're seeing in the market, and don't quote me on the stats, but I believe 1 out of 20 job posts out there now require some sort of AI competence, right? So that's one of the things that we're seeing, that to be hireable or to get into an organization, they're looking how AI literate or fluent you are, right? Also, they're looking for the foundations, if you are coming with the right foundation. So outside of the judgment that we've talked about, which is a critical consideration, right? And this is for the universities. The universities will have to demonstrate, and the organizations are going to check for that. Is this degree, did this person really know their subject matter, right? Do they truly understand what the degree entailed, right? So ensuring that we can design our programs for AI present world is going to be critical. And it came down to the assessment, as Professor said. Are we designing, or are we going on the same course to assess a student when we know AI exists? That means it reduces the credibility of that degree, right? So you have to ensure that how we are looking at assessing people, it is now determining if they're really learning. Is there real learning erosion? Then we're also looking for the fundamentals, right? Do we understand appropriate AI and data governance, right? Do we truly understand the data protection requirements? These are the things that I believe need to be instilled from the university level to ensure that when we're utilizing the AI tool, we not only know how to use it, but we know how to use it ethically, and we know the governance rules around using it, right? So how I see the market shifting, and when you combine AI literacy with data and analytics, the requirements for entry has increased even more, right? So the market is looking at critical thinkers that can bring effective solutions to their organization. It's not about the tools. It's about how we have designed a framework to equip the next generation of students to be able to work well and help this organization succeed. And I know my team said I mustn't bring up any PwC surveys, but there was a study that was done of 1,200 companies, and it found that only 20% of the companies had 70% of the benefit. So everybody pushing out tools, everybody doing, it's not about the tools. It's how you've framed that individual or those persons to effectively and critically look at how we can use it to reinforce or re-engineer our business processes. So once again, it goes back to what I led to. How fluent are our students? And we hear about, and persons might think that AI fluency is a specialist skill. It isn't. It has to be a skill just like numeracy, critical thinking, and writing, right? Across the entire board. How we're equipping that labor force for the ask, because we see that there's unavoidable entry-level erosion because of AI. So we now need to be elevating persons to a next level so that they can, if that occurs, right, it's created a new entry level for individuals. So if we're not designing our programs with that in mind, particularly, I hear that women are doing a lot of the entry-level positions, and 40% are female dominating. We're going to create an inequity in the market. We're going to create a hireability issue in the market if we are not designing our programs to fully equip our students for the next entry level. Thank you for that.
Just one thing here, President, before I move on. I couldn't avoid this. I heard this term, which sounds very PwC consultancy like, entry-level erosion.
I just made it
You were triggered by that. Oh gosh. All right. So just on that question, very quickly, where I see some risk for Jamaica specifically is in the BPO sector. I believe that there are activities in the BPO sector that are going to come under some serious pressure because of how good AI is getting at being more human in terms of the voice simulations and the fact that AI is actually really good at repetitive tasks, right? Which is an element of the BPO sector. So I'm not saying all the jobs in the BPO sector are at risk, because if you know anything about the BPO sector, it's not just about I think we use the word call center a bit colloquially. It's actually a bit sophisticated, and there are various jobs there, but many of them I think are seriously at risk. Where I see AI already active in terms of certain industries is in HR. So in the UK, before I came home, many companies were using AI to screen. So they'll get 6,000 applications and they'll just load that through the AI tool, and AI will say, well, okay, these 150 people I think come closest. And that's quite typical now, I think, in the UK. In fact, it was a big complaint from graduates that they were being screened by AI. But I think that's here to stay. I don't think a lot of companies are going to look through 6,000 applications manually anymore. So there are some examples where it's already pretty active. I am skeptical about the pace. When I hear these statistics that, AI is going to erode all these jobs, I am very skeptical. But I'll give you a few examples in engineering just to sort of highlight how universities will need to adapt. If I look at engineering and I take specifically technical drawing, right? Technical drawing was you may have seen schoolboys walking with T-squares and right, and I actually did technical drawing not only at CXC but at GCSE, right? So I was fully engrossed in the subject, and then when I migrated to the UK, the university was in the last year of doing technical drawing with a T-square. It pretty much transitioned to it didn't transition to AutoCAD. That's a Jamaica thing. It transitioned to a 3D modeling software because where technical drawing is now, you start with a 3D model and then you break it back down into 2D, whereas we originally were taught you start with 2D and build it back up. And that's quite standard now. Now, have people lost jobs? Not necessarily. It's just that engineers, rather than using a T-square, they now go on a computer and they do their drawings. I don't have that scary feeling about AI. I just think that we as universities need to transition. So, if any institution out there is teaching with a T-square, maybe you need to quickly shift to a software tool. All right. So it's just that sort of adaptation that I think will happen.
Very quickly on that to support you. So I think, as I said before, we can't ignore it. We certainly can't ignore it, and we have not been. But I also think we should not panic. And I think the kind of what we've been saying in terms of a deliberate, structured approach is what needs to happen. So I told you the example of my travel agent earlier. I'll tell you the other thing. So it's about thinking about what the world will look like before it actually becomes that way, and positioning yourself for it. So I'll give you one little example. So CMU has been the center for producing welders in a particular space, right? We have the welding program and it's strong, and we have our welding workshops and so on. But we just started to set up our virtual welding lab. Nobody's asking or forcing us to go into virtual welding, but that's something we understand is coming down the pipeline. It's more efficient, it's allowing us to do it. So we are setting up our lab. So again, in 7 years when we're talking about the steel industry and all of what's happening in the Midwest and so on, and everybody says, well, no, virtual welding is here, and we're gonna say, well, we were doing it before it was a sexy topic. And so I'm just saying, it's about having the foresight. And that's why this kind of research is so important, because it begins a particular dialogue. We have a foundation upon which to build. We have insights, some of which are actually counterintuitive, which I quite like about research. As you say, you follow where the data takes you. And the things that are counterintuitive, you do more research and you figure out what are the real drivers behind all of that, and position yourself.
By the way, Hart were the first to introduce virtual welding, so you've been pipped. Silver medal this time, yes.
Gentlemen, thank you. All right, good evening, everyone.
I think
Kudos
Professor Thorpe, to be fair to him, you're gonna, okay, all right.
Okay, thank you, sir. So good evening, everyone. I am Nassim Thompson. Kudos to the researchers for a very needy, I must say, and impactful research. I have a question. So I am dean at the National Police College of Jamaica. At the college, we may give a dramatization for an operations order. Now, an operations order is something that every police officer has to do before they go out and do operations. So for example, they give the dramatization and they put the prompt and rubric into a Gen AI, and a script is created. Students study the script and deliver the dramatization fairly well. How can we bridge the gap between academic integrity and the ethical use of AI in similar situations?
I think that's a really good case study. That's all I'd say, right? I think that's a really good example of how you can use the tool in a classroom where you're able to generate case studies and actually train your students on scenarios that they will eventually meet as police officers. So that's a good example.
Yeah. I'm so glad you asked that question. I would have brought it up in my final closing remarks because it hasn't come forward in the discussions yet. And that is, even in the way that data was reported, there's a presumption that the use of AI is automatically something dishonest. And in fact, what we need to transition to, when we think about what academic integrity is really about, it's really about representing, what you're representing as yours really belongs to you and you can defend. And a way of saying that it should feed into policies and so on is to make sure humans remain accountable for what they're producing. Now, in this case, if they said to you, we generated this dramatization using this mechanism, and what they're doing is actually valid and relevant to the thing you're trying to teach them, then where's the fault in that? And in a way, this is exactly what I meant by us having to figure out how are we going to incorporate AI in a way that's empowering so that indeed we're producing a more productive labor force. Because if we get them to go out there thinking that anytime they use it, they have to hide it and pretend that they didn't, that's actually dishonest at the deepest levels. And so what we really need is for an environment in which it is open. And so at UWI, what we've done is said, look, if you are a lecturer, it is your responsibility, incumbent on you, first to declare what is the expected appropriate use. So you can't bring up a student to say they violated this, that, and other because they use AI, unless you had a statement that said they're not allowed to. So the first, it begins with you stating what is expected, what's appropriate, and then when they submit, then for them to declare that I have been in compliance with these rules. And so your example, if the instructor sees that as an appropriate way of doing it, let me even, look, we may even get to the point where you're setting assignments that says, go use the AI and come back and do the following things and assess what you've done and sort of get them to be cognitively engaging with what AI is giving them back. And in that way, we might be able to improve our critical thinking skills. On the matter of critical thinking, I think that AI is one of those, we're on a knife edge. Because it is so powerful, it does a lot for us, and it's very easy for us to get lazy. Look at all the writing that it offers to do for us. And if you keep letting it do that for you, pretty soon you are no longer owning what you are sending. I mean, most of it is generated by something else. So the danger is, how do we, because it's so convenient, it's so tempting, how do we hold ourselves back from that and retain that right and ownership, that accountability that I spoke about, in a way that when in fact we are putting forward, that when we get a temptation of cutting the corner and letting AI just speak for us, that we hold back on that and say, no, actually, I want to say it this way. This is actually, I meant to say it that way. Or this is really what I'm putting forward. We have to figure out how we do that, embedded in our curricula and as universities, so that our graduates are graduating with that kind of competence deeply embedded, not just in one subject, not as a tack-on topic, but in fact, throughout all the curricula, throughout all our programs.
Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, colleagues. All. So I'm Sean Thorpe, the Dean of the Faculty of Engineering and Computing here at UTech. Very lively discussion, and I applaud the study by Professor Golding and his team, and the College of Business generally for this. particular forum. So forward deployed engineers, I think that's the terminology that the wider ecosystem has started to use in terms of the skill sets. So to Professor Golding's point about where the labor market is going, even in PwC Global, they're hiring forward deployed engineers and many of the other institutes. I make the point to look at the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room as it relates to AI, and we're making a quantum leap, and I'm not talking about quantum computing yet, right? We're making a quantum leap, but I'm not talking about quantum computing yet. The skill sets that we need to engender in order to be able to be practitioners in this fast-paced environment is that we want to be able to have greater command of the AI in order to build tools for a market as a developing country, which means therefore the accountant that you referred to, for example, earlier, in 2018, we were in this very room talking about AI replacing accountants, 2018. But the bigger argument is that you need machine learning accountants, or you need machine learning engineers who understand how to build these tools that can serve the wider community. And hence, I think the conversation we should also be having is that across the various disciplines, it is not reasonable to say that if you're in engineering, all of you engineers over there do AI. So therefore, AI is sitting over in the engineering school. AI sits in the business school, it sits in the education school. I'm looking at what is happening in other universities worldwide, where it has become pervasive across all schools, all colleges, all faculties, which means that as the educator, we have to own that opportunity. Well, okay, this is a chance to learn this new space, because those of us in computer science or engineering, if we want to be more relevant to the public, we need to go and learn some accounting to help accountants, or we need to go and learn hospitality, especially if we're going to apply AI in the sector. So I'm just making the point that I see this not as a squeeze, Professor Golding. I'm seeing it as really as a opportunity where we learn across the disciplines. Because if you're studying the AI models very carefully, models are now developing skills. If we were to do a technical assessment of these AI models, models now have the features of skills that they can build inside of them. I'm saying to us as an academic community, regardless of the level, I think the opportunity is for us to start learning across the disciplines, become a student again in almost every space as a foundation to allow ourselves and our students who we are trying to align for the workforce to be relevant each time around. The AI keeps changing, right? So that was just my bigger observation of what I'm seeing as the opportunity, but great forum. Thank you.
Any final comments? You had a final
Yes.
question?
Thank you.
Final
Again.
question.
Oh, okay. If someone else wants to go, because I've gone already. Okay. Okay, so my question is this. We see the fight globally for AI, the chips and all that, and we see that fight going on. Who is going to control all of this? We also see the cost for energy that is ballooning because of this. So as a small developing country, and as universities in this sphere, how are we going to deploy our resources so we're not left behind? Because I think the things that we have now, the ChatGPT and all of that, that is free, will at some point become extremely expensive.
Look, that's a great question. I think maybe the answer lies in what Professor Thorpe was alluding to, that we may not have the physical infrastructure in terms of massive data centers, but we do have access to the tools, and we perhaps should look at how we can develop our own large or small language models, right, that are uniquely our intellectual property, So, for example, the world stood up and noticed when China developed DeepSeek using far less computing infrastructure than their friends in the north. And so I think therein perhaps lies some ability for Jamaicans, the Caribbean more widely, to own their piece of AI, the development of our own unique large language models and so on. And therein now lies the need for us to really understand the fundamentals of the tool, right? Not just going into ChatGPT and applying a tool that's already built, but developing our own tool. And I think therein now there's a need now for us to look at the academic depth that's required to do that, right? And I think that's the challenge for us. Certainly at UTech, and I'm looking at Professor Thorpe, how do we develop that human capacity to program these things on our own? And I think perhaps I would argue that we need to look to the diaspora, their academics, the Jamaicans in the diaspora who perhaps have these skill sets who we might now need to attract home to help us there.
If I may, I'll just give a quick response to that. For small countries like ourselves, perhaps the best thing we could do is position ourselves to take advantage of that competition between them. One of the important side effects, the mechanism by which DeepSeek produced their big model was in fact a process called distillation, which couldn't have been done if OpenAI didn't already have one. So it was the availability of ChatGPT. And essentially what it involves is coming up with a suite of questions, seeing what the answers are, and sort of reverse engineering what the parameters must be to generate that. But that's not it. That's not the full story, but that's a part of it. Now the point is that the technology that they've used to do that, they've now built on it and leveraged. And so you see not just those large models being very competitive across the benchmarks against the biggest models being generated in the US, but, and this is the part where I think we can benefit, you're seeing distilled models that come down as small, that can run on your phone and run on your other edge devices. And what that means then is that all the concerns about things like data privacy, your data is being run on the cloud and it might not be protected and so on, give it enough time, what will happen is that you'll have highly capable devices that you can run on your own private devices. Right now, it takes quite a bit of computational power. You need perhaps 32 gigabytes of memory, of RAM on a GPU in order to get decent performance. But for example, so even Google is getting into that. You've heard of Gemma 4? That model released about a few weeks ago, in fact, that has the capability on some of those benchmarks to perform like the free Gemini 3.1 model. And in fact, you can run that at the smallest level, you can run that on your phone. It doesn't quite perform at the same level on your phone, but you could have it on a machine that you could have at home. It only gets better from here. But for us to really take advantage of that, as you said, as a small island state, we have to be strategic, we have to be smart about it. But it's not over, I would say.
Ladies and gentlemen, it has been indeed a pleasure. We will have the discussion, and we'll continue the discussion after this session, because we know that there are many more persons who have questions, and our panelists will be here, even for a few more minutes, to answer those questions. But it's very clear that the conversation needs to continue. It's very clear that as academics and industry, but not just industry, but I'm looking at Mr. Mayor's quality assurance, that the dialogue is necessary. It is necessary. And so I want to thank you all, our panelists, for sharing your thoughts with our team here, and as well as those who are online. So thank you, gentlemen. And so over to our MC.
Sorry, Professor Golding is going to transition from a researcher momentarily into a Greek. as in he will be bearing gifts.
Dr. Mirage, Dr. Allen, please. Pat? I'm going to ask you to, yeah. Pat, Dr. Mirage, I'm going to ask you to present gifts to all our external panelists, starting with Dr. Kaur, Professor Kaur. Yes, let me put them all there. Let me hold this then for you, so you can do it one at a time. I'll just give them to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. You have a big infrastructural challenge. Mr. Myers? I just joined the queue. Yeah, you take back. I don't think that's necessary. I don't think that's necessary at all. But no, but thanks. Yes, you feel more as having an AI summit.
We are going to ask Mr. Allen to present to our president, our MC, and our moderator. Compy. And to our MC. Hold this, please. And to our moderator. We were very tempted to give our president one of the UTEC bags, but we were advised not to. Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much for coming out. We thought that this was an extremely important discussion and one which is ongoing. Again, thank our panelists for coming out. And thank all the persons in the background. I want to thank Patricia Thomas. Listen, and FMD and communications and all of the support within UTEC. Communications, all of the camera people, marketing and all of that. Just big them up for me now, please. Come on. Thanks very much, guys. There's some refreshments outside. Please partake.
Before you go, please, just to do the final formalities. Again, joining Professor Golding in thanking you for being here this afternoon. And just to say that what ensued is what has occurred at the end of the research cycle. So we have the dissemination of the results in terms of the impacts, and one of the pathways through which research has impacts is on public policy. And so we're very pleased that you were here this afternoon, and thank you very much again, and enjoy the refreshments.